every line, crafted to bless every time. In the world of Aaron's tales, every story, every sail, Aaron tells a story with a southern charm. Blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't strive. Join Aaron on a journey where the tales unfold. He's got a way with words, a storyteller bold. Sometimes it's facts, sometimes it's fiction. Dramatic highs, anticlimactic conviction. His voice moves like wind through the autumn trees, crafting memories that put your heart at ease. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Spiritual whispers, political debates, stories that resonate, open the gates from the heart of the South. With a gentle touch, Aaron's tales, they mean so much. He unravels mystery with an open mind, connecting souls one word at a time. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Every word, every line, crafted to bless every time. In the world of Aaron's tales, every story, every sail, Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't strive. Join Aaron on a journey where the tales unfold. He's got a way with words, a storyteller bold. Sometimes it's facts, sometimes it's fiction. Dramatic highs, anticlimactic conviction. His voice moves like wind through the autumn trees, crafting memories that put your heart at ease. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Spiritual whispers, political debates, stories that resonate, open the gates from the heart of the South. With a gentle touch, Aaron's tales, they mean so much. He unravels mystery with an open mind, connecting souls one word at a time. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Every word, every line, crafted to bless every time. In the world of Aaron's tales, every story, every sail, Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't strive. Join Aaron on a journey where the tales unfold. He's got a way with words, a storyteller bold. Sometimes it's autumn trees, crafting memories that put your heart at ease. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Spiritual whispers, political debates, stories that resonate, open the gates from the heart of the South. With a gentle touch, Aaron's tales can mean so much. He unravels mystery with an open mind, connecting souls one word at a time. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Every word, every line, crafted to bless every time. In the world of Aaron's tales, every story, every sail, Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't strive. Join Aaron on a journey where the tales unfold. He's got a way with words, a storyteller bold. Sometimes it's facts, sometimes it's fiction. Dramatic highs, anticlimactic conviction. His voice moves like wind through the autumn trees, crafting memories that put your heart at ease. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Spiritual whispers, political debates, stories that resonate, open the gates from the heart of the South. With a gentle touch, Aaron's tales can mean so much. He unravels mystery with an open mind, connecting souls one word at a time. Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't try. Every word, every line, crafted to bless every time. In the world of Aaron's tales, every story, every sail, Aaron tells a story with a southern charm, blessing hearts, doing no harm. You might laugh, you might cry, you might learn something, but please don't strive. Join Aaron on a journey where the tales unfold. He's got a way with words, a storyteller bold. Sometimes it's facts, sometimes it's fiction. Dramatic highs, anticlimactic conviction. His voice moves like wind through the autumn trees, crafting memories that put your heart at ease. Aaron tells a story with a southern.
All right, good evening. I hope you can hear me. It looks like all my meters are running and everything is up. And if you can hear me or not, put a comment in the wherever you're chatting from. We are live right now on YouTube and Facebook and Rumble. I wanted to start out by talking briefly about Rumble. Why do I talk about it so much? Rumble is a more free platform than any of the others. Rumble also offers the opportunity for creators to benefit a little bit easier on things. If people like the content, they can benefit a little bit easier from it. And there's a join button right there on Rumble. So if you go to the Rumble app and you hit join, it'll give you some details on that. As we get more and more people interested, I will be putting out more and more members-only content. And so if you join for a small fee, that's something that can definitely help you. I hope. If not, it'll help me. It goes to feed starving children. Their names are Corbin, Ava Grace, and Eden. Those would be my kids. Tonight, I want to talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart. And, it's kind of been a while since anyone talked about COVID. It's kind of been this thing that we lived through and we struggled through, and everyone had opinions, and your opinions might be different than mine, and that's perfectly fine. I used to have a saying, and that is that you can agree with me or you can be wrong. Those are your options. But no, I'm not saying I have everything thought out and everything worked out in this regard. But it's been a while since I'm going to take these headphones off so I can hear myself a little bit better right now, but I'll have to put them back on in a minute. It's been a while since people have talked about COVID, and COVID has kind of just slowly drifted away. But I'm afraid, and lots of more conservative podcasters are afraid, that if we let that slip by and not think about it too much, history has a way of repeating itself if you don't fix the problems. And I'm pretty sure everyone can agree that COVID was a problem, and that not a lot of progress or improvement was made throughout the course of the events. I want to start with a story. 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I announced that I was going to run for school board locally here in my county in South Carolina. And the campaign had its ups, it had its downs. There were some moments that I'm proud of, some moments that I'm not proud of, because I didn't really have a campaign manager, and I sometimes didn't control myself too well in talking to certain people, and there was things I should have done better. However, there's one thing that I'm not ashamed of that I handled, and that was when I had to confront the principal at my son's elementary school. And this is not a story that I've told publicly too often, but I had to do it because of how certain things developed. And eventually it led to me generating and putting in a FOIA request to get information about how they operated with this third party. So the long and short of it was this. Here's my story for tonight. Once upon a time, there was a group of children in elementary school who attended an after-school program. And that after-school program was not owned or run by the school. It was run by a third-party organization out of North Carolina who has establishments all along the East Coast. But they had partnered with the school district, and the school district allowed them to profit off and provide their child care services. It was public. It was not it was a private organization, but it wasn't a religious or a Christian endeavor. It was a secular academic, and they did some nice things. They did entertain the children. They made sure they had time to do their homework, and they provided, it was great for parents who had to work late to go and pick up their child. It was after school care. And they also did some events and things, talent shows, things like that. And my son really enjoyed it. However, through the course of events, at some point, apparently a person who at the time was not employed by the school, but was employed by this after school program, because it was after school hours, had contracted COVID. And this person had served snacks to many of the students. And in turn, any of those students who had contracted COVID from that employee went to school the next day and would have been around everyone in their class. Conversely, anyone in their class would have been around anyone in any number of classes, and any teachers who had multiple classes, and administrators who walked the halls. The way this was handled, though, was that anyone who was at the after-school program was not stopped from going to the after-school program while the employee was recovering and as a separation and a social distancing endeavor, they were kicked out of school during that time. Now, there was no evidence, of course, for HIPAA reasons. They couldn't tell us who the employee was. Didn't matter. But they didn't shut down the entire school, even though all of those children were around other children in the school the next day. It gets worse. But by the way, if a church, which around here churches lease school facilities all the time, if a church had leased the facility, which they did during COVID, and the church had someone with COVID, and my son, let's just say, happened to be at that church event inside the school, Lord help the school that tries to kick my son out of school for attending a private church event on school campus. You see the dilemma there. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But because it was something that the school district had responded to or partnered with, they felt that the school had the right to tell my son and tell us that he was not going to be able to attend school. But that's not actually what happened either. What happened was the school expected the after-school program, this private company out of North Carolina, to instruct the parents that they were not allowed to attend public school in South Carolina. The school never sent one iota of information, one detail of communication about it. They expected that the third party that we paid money to, but is not taxpayer funded, to let us know that we were not able to, my son was not going to be able to attend, and he had to quarantine at the public school that is taxpayer funded. I had a problem with this. So again, no one ever confronted, or not confronted, but no one ever communicated with the parents, even to the day where supposedly we had gotten word that kids were not allowed to go back to school. I took my son to school anyway because the school had not communicated anything, nothing. And so while I was there, I went ahead and took the liberty of discussing that with the principal. And the principal said, well, yeah, they were supposed to let you know. I said, first of all, it's not the private organization's job to let me know that my son cannot attend public school. Secondly, you can't tell me how or when my son was impacted by this. You can't tell me that he definitely was, and you're not closing the entire school, even though all of those students were around other students. And the answer was, and I have this in a recorded conversation, and I've made it public before, the answer was more or less, well, that's just the way we handled it. It led me to put in a FOIA request to outline and try to determine the details between what the relationship was between this private organization and the school district. And what I got back was about 40 pages. And about 18 of those pages were completely redacted, solid black, top to bottom. A few of them had one word that was not redacted because this involved contracts between the school district and the private institution, and they claimed that this was proprietary information. I paid for this redacted material. I paid a lot of money for this redacted material. It did not help me at all, except to determine that there was no policy, no relationship, no rules set in place to determine, as far as I could see, what happens when a pandemic hits. Now, obviously, no one knew what they were doing. So there's today's story. It ended in frustration, and to this day, I still don't have resolve about that. I still believe that the school district handled it very inappropriately. They did forbid me from leaving my son at the school that day, and this has come up in numerous conversations since with various people. And the fact of the matter is, all I cared about was getting my son his education, because I knew that the longer he was not in school, we had just come from a year or more without being in school. Okay, and from March of 2020 until August of 2021, there was no school. They tried to do remote things, but it was not working for a third grader and fourth grader to do that. So anyway, it never received the resolution that I believe it should have received. Now, I told you that story to outline what I'm about to tell you today. And that is, I want to introduce you, and this has been all over certain news outlets, probably not the news outlets that you may or may not be as familiar with, but I want to introduce you to this man. Is a medical doctor, and he does research, and he's involved in pharmaceutical companies and things like that. But Dr. Jay Varma also had a very, very large platform. And I want to take a little while to explain a little bit more about Dr. Varma. Dr. Varma loved to tell people things. Ostracized. And Dr. Varma was the COVID czar of New York City. Now, why does that matter? Because New York City set the groundwork and the framework for how a lot of not just cities functioned during the COVID pandemic, and not even just more liberal cities, but even the conservative cities, about what was safe and what was not. At the beginning, this was a medical doctor. Clearly, he knew what he was talking about. Dr. Varma was actually Bill de Blasio's right-hand man, the mayor of New York City, his right-hand man during the COVID pandemic. And Dr. de Blasio, I even have a video I'm going to play in just a minute of him passing the microphone to Dr. Varma. Let's watch that for a minute. Let's watch that.
How can we help them through it? The testing can give people some valuable information for sure, and it can be part of a larger strategy, but it isn't unto itself enough to save the life. And that's where I think some of the confusion comes in. So I've tried as the layman. Let's let Dr. Varma get in, and any Dr. Barbeau, anyone can help clarify further.
Great, thank you very much. I do think the kind of key messages to think about are that we use different tools for different types of epidemics. Right now, we're in this storm. And the tools that we might use when it's just a little bit rainy or when it's a sunny day have to be used differently. So I think the mayor has clearly described that testing is just a tool. It needs to be combined with the fundamentals of public health. We need to find people who are sick, make sure they're separated. We need to find people who are exposed, also separate them, but also monitor them carefully so that if they do get sick, we can get them the care that they need. So I think it's very important for people to understand that during this very difficult time where there's a major storm, we can't use all of those tools the way we want to. But we need to plan for that. We don't know if the technology that we want is going to be there. We don't know if all of the supplies are going to be there. But if we don't plan aggressively now, we won't be ready to turn that on the moment they are ready. So I think one of the key messages for people to understand is different tools for different times. But we also need to plan to use those tools as effectively as we can when the time comes.
So Dr. Jay Varma just said a lot of things that a lot of people said during this event. We need to separate those that are sick. But then he also said, oh, but we've got to separate those that are not sick, but that have been exposed. Okay. And we've got to, and it ends up being word salad. Some of the things he said, that we're in a storm and all these different things. He kind of sounded like Kamala Harris in some of his analogies there. But, a whole lot of words and very little substance. Very little meaning. But he set the rules, and he set the pace with the blessing of Bill de Blasio. Now, you might remember, Bill de Blasio was, if I'm not mistaken, was also one of the people that had presidential aspirations, and he was a Democrat. But you're going to learn some things about what happened today. And I'm going to be sharing with you in just a few minutes of a snippet from an operation that was done. Now, there may end up being some words slipped in here that I may not catch, or that I don't have the ability to mute it right now. Steven Crowder is a conservative entertainer. He is a comedian, and he is a Christian. Some people would say that he can be a little crass. He can use words that that some Christians would go and be flabbergasted by. Steven Crowder is not a pastor. Steven Crowder is not a spiritual leader. Steven Crowder is a human being. But what Steven Crowder does have is humor. And he has a very, very large, mostly conservative audience on his side. And he runs an operation called Louder with Crowder. And they have a membership program similar to what I'm doing on my premium program. But except he's got the people, called Mug Club. And when you subscribe for Mug Club, you get they'll send you an actual mug in the mail, hand-etched mug. It says, part of his show, it says Louder with Crowder. And Steven Crowder, last year, he kind of rebooted. He was with Blaze TV for a while, and then he separated from their platform and was trying to figure out what to do, because big tech, or even what they call big con tech, was conservative tech, was not something he was excited about being a part of. So Steven Crowder decided he was going to take the memberships that he had and convert them over to Rumble, and push Rumble, and they worked with him very closely, and the Locals platform, which is attached to this video as well, and shift his Mug Club members there. And it has worked very well as an alternative to YouTube. Well, Steven Crowder, as part of this endeavor, also launched something that they call Mug Club Undercover, and it's some secret hidden camera work, very well done, usually involving let's just say men's vices, usually involving a young, attractive female that has a body camera attached and goes undercover, which is perfectly legal to record people against their will, by the way, whether they know about it or not in most states. Otherwise, we would not have investigative journalism. And so what we're going to find here in this next clip, and I'm going to let it run a few minutes, and if something is said that doesn't suit your taste, just understand the severity of what we're dealing with here. It was arranged that this young lady would go and have a visit with Dr. Varma. And Dr. Varma would reveal some very interesting things during the encounter, during the drinks and the dinner. Some things that while Dr. Varma was saying, "You shall do this, you shall do this, you shall not do this," Dr. Varma was over here going, "Yes, but I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this." The hypocrisy was very much there and very much alive. But even more so, the question I want you to grasp from all of this is, apart from this being very interesting to me, is what policies, now we're here in South Carolina, but what policies were set in place by unelected officials that were either inspired by or directly collaborated from the policies that were set in New York City that Dr. Varma had his hands directly in. I intend to go ahead and put it out there tomorrow to put in and submit a FOIA request to what is now the Department of Public Health. It was the Department of Health Environmental Control 3 years ago, or even earlier this year, but now they've split it out, to receive any communication with New York City from the state of South Carolina, to or from the state of South Carolina, involving COVID regulations and models of COVID epidemic procedures, and see what we come back with. I will let you know. I don't know if there will be anything, but it doesn't matter ultimately, because the same policies that were put in New York City, closing schools, closing down, not telling family to stay home, don't travel, that was a national lie. It was a national lie. And you're going to find that out in this video. So I intend on putting out that FOIA request, and I'll let you know the results of it very soon when I hear back from them. Also, real quick, a side story about I lost my train of thought there. We're going to watch a few minutes of this, and because I want you to see some of the responses. Now, again, this is Mug Club Undercover, which I have a membership to, and this is not anything I did, obviously, but I want you to hear what Dr. Varma has to say.
You have a dossier on me?
Yeah, but it is about you as a government official being the architect of the policy,
So those things are
having sex parties and having dance parties while businesses are being shut down. And New York sees an unemployment that's twice the national average as a result of policy.
My wife and I had a party with like 10 people who everybody got vaccinated. Not vaccinated, everybody got tested and things like
There
that.
was over 12 people when the gatherings at that point you had to do in secret because no one else could gather 10 or more. If you could do it all over again, would you do it the same way? Or would you allow people their freedoms and not harm New York City like you did?
Today, I introduce you to Dr. Jay Varma, the man widely touted as the COVID architect in charge of New York City's COVID response, the right-hand man to Mayor Bill de Blasio, who in his own words convinced the mayor to do the mandate. In short, the man who brought down a city that had 2,800 small businesses closed, never to be reopened, a city of failing test scores after over 1 million students were kept out of classrooms for more than a year, and a city where tens of thousands of New Yorkers simply left. Today's Mug Club Undercover video saw Varma brag to our journalist about his medical background at places like the CDC, his newfound celebrity.
It's kind of a treat to hear you describe me as a celebrity.
His influence over the city. How he was able to force mass vaccination on people by making them, quote, uncomfortable through applying both financial and social pressure.
It's like, okay, I'm just gonna get vaccinated.
And he even gleefully bragged that he was the man responsible for making it impossible for Kyrie Irving to play for the Nets. I wonder how Mr. Irving feels about that.
So I like to keep that stuff private.
Of course, Varma himself wasn't affected. While New Yorkers were allowed to gather indoors and many watched their loved ones die alone, he bragged about having drug-fueled sex parties. You can watch the whole piece by clicking the link in the description there. But something important here, in reviewing the footage, one thing stood out to me. Not once did he show anything resembling remorse.
Yeah, you can keep it. Yeah.
Never once did this man, the trusted authority for New Yorkers and for many across the country, ever seem to have a remote interest in self-reflection or even the possibility of acknowledging the destruction that residents faced as the result of his policy. And if he's so sure about the righteousness of the policies he advocated, why didn't he follow them? Why did he demand submission through fear from the citizens of New York over something that he did not fear himself at all?
All right, so I'm going to stop it right there because you can kind of see some of the icky, grittiness of the behavior. So I'm going to outline some of the things real quick that was said and done that Mr. Varma admitted to during this undercover investigation. Number one, he admitted that while everyone else in New York City and around the country, even in conservative places like I live, were locked down, shut down, couldn't leave your house, stay indoors for 14 days, 15 days to slow the spread. Don't you dare go outside. Movie theaters, grocery stores, grocery stores, certain ones can stay open. You know, we're going to shut down in certain cities, churches, but, liquor stores, Lord forbid, the vape shops, those need to stay open because those are necessities. I'm talking about you, California. You got into all of this craziness, and there were architects of this. This didn't happen organically. There were people who sat down and said, how can we control the population through this process? And one of the leaders there of doing that in New York City, the largest city in the country, one of the largest in the world, definitely one of the largest in the Western Hemisphere, was Dr. Jay Varma. So some of the things he admitted to, and this is not, I've never claimed that this was going to be child friendly just because occasionally I talk about my children. One of the things he admits to in the video, and you can go watch it, look up Steven Crowder on X, it's S Crowder, and look up Mug Club on YouTube, or actually don't use YouTube, go to Rumble where you can watch these videos. You're going to see him discuss, while everyone else was locked down, him inviting 8 to 10 people when they was not allowed in New York City, having orgies. Okay, You're going to see him, not going to see it, but you're going to hear him talk about it. You're going to hear him talk about while everyone was locked down and you couldn't have more than 20 or 30 people and no out, everything had to be outdoors and everyone wear masks and people were literally getting arrested for not following these to a T. You're going to hear him say that underneath certain banks down on Wall Street, there were 200, 300 people, rave parties going on that he went and participated in because, he's under all the stress running the COVID response for the city. Oh, bless his heart. He needs to get out and he needs to unwind, bless his heart. So again, I come to the point here of here locally or in your area, wherever you're from, whatever city or state you're in, whatever country you're in, are you just from now on going to accept at face value that what the government leaders do and say is the same as if God himself had said it? I remember the story I was going to say earlier. One of my very first campaign events I did when I was running for school board was ironically right beside that elementary school where I confronted the principal. And that night they had a representative from the Department of Health and Environmental Control. We had two representatives, state representatives that were there that were running for re-election, and they were hosting this event and also just meeting with their constituents also. And but over the course of the meeting, and this girl was very, very young, and she was excited to talk about all the environmental things, excited to talk about, all these things. Also had DOT there for the Department of Transportation, talking about road work. And this girl was excited to talk about, if you need groundwater tested and all these things. Except that in South Carolina, public health was under the Department of Health and Environmental Control. And so the COVID regulations and the COVID rules dictated to schools for school buses, for travel, for all these things, for what businesses could and couldn't be open and all that, was dictated by the Department of Health and Environmental Control. So there were some people that I had met there for the first time, and I actually texted some of them tonight to say, hey, look, I'm going to be talking about this, that will recall and recount and attest to the fact that this girl, first of all, wasn't prepared to talk about COVID. But the bottom line came down to who is making all of these draconian decisions? Who is sitting in Columbia, about 30 minutes away from where I am right now, and making and deciding that, yes, you can do this, you can't do that. Who is making these decisions and who elected them? The fact of the matter is, in most governments, in state governments in our country, and in South Carolina as well, the legislature legislates to those departments, and those departments can codify regulations. In other words, and the leaders are appointed by the governor, who also appoints boards, and some and some of them can come up with their own rules for how their boards are decided. But these organizations have the power, and DHEC got so big, that's why I mentioned that they split them up. It was too powerful, and this is one of the reasons why, where they could codify regulations and make you have laws passed on you by unelected officials. And I'm sorry, that might be how it works in some democracy with a lowercase d, but that is not how it works in a republic that we live in. We elect our officials to represent us. We don't, and to write the laws, to legislate. But we do not allow, especially not when it comes to these kind of draconian measures, unelected government bureaucrats to write codified laws like Dr. Varma in New York City. My FOIA request, again, is going to say, I want to see any communication between the Department of Health and Environmental Control and the government entities, the COVID entities in New York City that were making those decisions, or any state entities, honestly, because I want to see where these ideas came from. What impacted our state when our children saw their education being stolen from them by people who were unelected? And one of the other things you're going to see if you go and watch that video, the full undercover video with Dr. Varma, is him bragging that the schools were shut down and they knew a few things. Number one, they knew that the schools shutting down would be irreversibly detrimental to the children. that it would harm the children from day one. It would set them back years by what they did. They did it anyway. Why? In his words, Bill de Blasio was a weenie, and Bill de Blasio wouldn't stand up to the teachers' unions. Now, thankfully, in South Carolina, we don't really have teachers' unions. We did have something called SC for Ed, which tried to pretend like it was a few years ago, but that failed miserably, and it's not even functioning as far as I know right now. But these government leaders in these cities, and I think you could even equate some parts of the government in South Carolina with it, made irreversible, detrimental harm to our children with no research, no subject matter, and finally, no accountability to this day. So we're going to see a little bit of accountability starting to pan out, and I hope and pray that you will be with me as we make these entities more accountable in the future. Now, splitting up DHEC, that was a good start. Is that the end all of it? No. We've still got to be on guard. Dr. Varma, as of yesterday, had been working. He had left just to give you kind of wrap this up a little bit, he had left the state of New York as the pandemic was winding down. By the way, they'll say COVID is still with us. Oh, there's still some people that wear masks. They feel they need to. Okay, if you want to wear a mask, go ahead. I'm glad that all this, thou shalt wear a mask, has gone away. However, what else they implemented in New York City was strong vaccination mandates, where you still had to have your COVID card. You had to have your vaccination card to prove that you had been vaccinated in order to step outside your house or buy groceries or take, whatever the situations were, whatever you needed to do. Who was the person who was at the helm of all of that? You guessed it, Dr. J. Varma. And Dr. Varma even states in this undercover video, they knew there was no medical difference between a person who had been vaccinated and a person who had had COVID already. There was no difference. You had antibodies until you no longer had them. You had immunity until you no longer had it. If you had COVID, you had immunity. If you got the vaccination, you had immunity. In other words, the vaccinations are a joke. This can get me kicked off of YouTube, but the vaccinations were a joke. But natural immunity is a real thing, and he admits it in the video that they knew it was a real thing, but they caved to the unions, they caved to the pressure, and also he does express that it was a controlling experiment. How far are people willing to bow their knee to the government? As a matter of fact, he talks about that their goal was to make people uncomfortable with these vaccine mandates. Not that it was necessary medically, but that they needed to make sure that there was enough discomfort that you were afraid to lose your job or lose your well-being or lose your ability to move around, and scare people into doing what the government says. To me, they talk about Trump is literally Hitler, right? The guy who's been... Anyway, let's not even go there. But those are Nazi tactics. Those are fascist tactics. We're going to force people to do what we want, and if they won't do it, we're going to make them so uncomfortable that they will feel inclined out of the goodness of their own heart to follow suit. And we have seen it. We saw it in New York City. Thankfully, it was not that bad in South Carolina. However, the CMS mandate that came down that still required people to receive the vaccinations until it was killed was a real problem that even would have impacted my family. By the way, there's all kinds of people that work for state governments. Not all of them are employees of the state government, or even if they are an employee of the state government, some of them are hybrid that receive money, their salary, not from the state itself, but from federal grant money. And if you receive your salary from federal grant money, sometimes you fall under a different set of laws protecting your status as an employee than people who are truly state employees. And I'll give you an example. An employee who works for a federal grant under the CMS mandate would have still had to receive it, even though there was a state mandate that said they did not have to receive the vaccine. I know this firsthand. It is crazy. It has been crazy, and we still have work to do in this department. If we get lazy, there will be another pandemic that they generate that will continue to impact us, and it may hit harder next time because they know people are going to stand up stronger. And so it is time now. We have to say, you know what? I'm drawing a line in the sand. I will not allow this to happen to me and my family again. I will take my kids to school, or I will homeschool them, but I'm not going to let the government tell me that I can and can't go here or go there, or in the name of a made up process that unelected bureaucrats decided these are the rules we need to have. So yesterday, I got word that Jay Varma, who had now been a pharmaceutical rep or some consultant, senior vice president of a company called Sigma, Sigo, Tech, it doesn't matter, had indefinitely separated, taken a leave of absence. And then today, this was the news reports from New York City.
Well, the more is breaking news. Dr. Jay.
Well, that wasn't working very well. Hang on just a second. All right, I don't know how much you've been able to hear of the past 10 minutes now that I hear that my audio has gone out, but let's see. Hopefully you've been able to understand me, but here is that video.
Well, the more is breaking news. Dr. Jay Varma had been in the management team of Sigma Technologies, a medical technology company, which made a filing within the last hour with the Securities and Exchange Commission that reads in part, the board of directors of Sigma Technologies terminated Dr. Jay Varma effective immediately. And this comes.
So there's hope. There's hope that things can be fixed, that ships can be righted. We're 4 years into COVID. 4 years since March of, 4.5 years now. And there's the potential to right these wrongs. There's the potential to fix what's been broken for so long now. But we've got to stay strong, and we've got to stay motivated, and we can't get lazy, because if we get lazy, the next thing that's going to happen is going to be worse than the one that happened before. Freedom is not negotiable. Freedom is not a luxury, and freedom is not something that we should just give away willy-nilly and trust those who would so willingly mock our freedom by saying, "Thou shalt do one thing," and then go out and have raves and other types of events the rest of the time. Have a good night. God bless you. Bye-bye.